Hi, I'm Paul from BCTA. So the part of BCTA that I work for is ATMA, which is the Airtightness Testing and Measurement Association. They specifically deal with airtightness testing. You've probably heard of the test standards that we've got, but we also operate a competent person scheme in the UK. So I'm going to go through the qualification process for the 4 countries in the UK, because that's England, Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales. And we'll start by talking about the framework that's been set up by the government. So this framework was set up in 2014, and it's basically a framework that the competent person schemes follow. There was a working group from the English and Welsh governments that set up what's known as some minimum technical competence documents. And they basically identify the levels of the testers in terms of what buildings they can test, the minimum knowledge and understanding that is defined for each of those levels, and also the routes to initially gaining entry as an airtightness tester into the competent person schemes, but also how they can progress from those lower levels to the higher levels. Later on, Northern Ireland and Scotland adopted this framework. So the levels as they're defined, level 1 is the entry level, and this is basically buildings up to a gross volume of 4,000 cubic meters, which basically came from BSE 13829. The definition of what would be classed as a large and complex building was that volume of 4,000 cubic meters. The buildings have to be tested as a single entity, and the building must be able to be tested with a single fan. So consequently, not all buildings up to a volume of 4,000 cubic meters can be tested. It depends on how leaky they are or how airtight they are as to whether that's possible. Level 2 is basically where we move into multiple fans and the ability to test larger buildings. It's any building that can be tested in its entirety, and it's also large extensions to non-domestic buildings. Now, the reason large extensions of non-domestic buildings need testing is we've got a rule in the building regulations, which is although extensions are classed as existing buildings, and therefore they're not subject to an energy assessment and an airtightness test, if they hit 2 criteria, they get classed as new build. So that's when they've got a floor area over 100 meters squared, and they have a floor area that is at least 25% of the existing building. Under those conditions, the extensions get treated as new build, they're subject to an energy assessment, and they also need an airtightness test. So that's level 2. And then level 3 is basically a complex building that can't be tested as a single entity, so it has to be tested as a zones. So that's when you get into compartmentalized building tests, where you do co-pressurization or potentially without co-pressurization, where you're looking at high-rise buildings where it's difficult to achieve a uniform building pressure, or where you've got phased handover developments, which are normally things like large infrastructure buildings. For example, that might be something like a hospital where a central core is built first and that's occupied, and then additional wings are built on that hospital, and then they need occupied later. Now, obviously, because you've got an operational building, you can't test it at the end of completion. So what they do is they test the individual bits before they're occupied. And it's like a partial meeting of the building regulations for each of those phases. So the MTC identifies a series of national occupational standards for airtightness testers. And what these are is these are key functions associated with running an airtightness testing business, basically. So these are linked to each of the levels. There's 7 NOS that apply to all the levels, and then there's an individual NOS document or National Occupational Standard that is for level 1, for level 2, and for level 3. And as I said earlier, the MTC and actually through the National Occupational Standards, this is like the framework for competence that this working group set up and that all the 4 countries of the UK operate their competent person schemes under. So the areas that are not related to the individual levels, so you've got ASTATT1, so that's how to prepare to carry out an airtightness test. So they're kind of all the things that you need to do before you attend site, such as, checking your kit's calibrated, making sure that the weather's in favourable conditions so that you can actually do the test, making sure there's things like power on site before you get there. Then ASTATT2 is how to prepare the building. So that's things like temporary sealing and turning off ventilation systems, what to prepare for an airtightness test report. So that's gathering the information, collating it together, potentially lodging a test with a competent person scheme, and then producing the final documentation that then goes to your customer, that goes to an energy assessor, that then goes to building control. How to calculate the area of building envelopes, and that also covers additional details like the dimensional evidence that you need to gather to support those calculations. Then you've got the managing of the equipment, so that's making sure that kit goes out of calibration, that it gets quarantined, making sure that you have sufficient kit available to do your jobs, in terms of that you've not got something booked in and you have kit away for calibration. And then how to actually deal with inquiries, produce quotations, and the terms and conditions associated with those. And then finally, it's quality assuring the air testing procedure. So that covers things like document control, it covers things like complaints procedure, standard sort of ISO 9000 quality control issues. And then finally, the MTC identifies routes to gaining and progressing levels. So the ones that are identified, and these apply to level 1, level 2, or level 3, there is a training and assessment route, which is the more common route. And this involves attending the course, passing some exams, which are typically a practical exam, so it's a witness test. The second one is a theory exam, which is usually a multiple choice online exam. So you can understand background information about the testing, understand all the values that make a test valid in the test standards, and also you understand the building regulations. And then finally, there's an envelope exam where drawings are provided, and the delegates on the courses will then calculate the envelope areas. And if they're within certain tolerances, they pass that exam. The second route is provide experience of competence. So that means you've been testing for a number of years. You've got examples of previous tests that you've done. And under those conditions, you have a technical review of 5 previous tests, including the envelope calculations. If that stage is passed, there is a technical interview that's undertaken. That is usually substituted for the theory exam from the training and assessment route. And then the third one is a witness test on a live construction site. And that is the equivalent of the practical exam for the training and assessment route. MVQ, or other recognised qualification, this route is listed, but I'm not aware of any other recognised qualifications that are used within the UK. So although it's within the framework, it's not used. I did have someone a while ago want to establish an MVQ for airtightness testing. So that would be a very short college-based course. But the market is quite saturated in the UK. So there's probably about, within a given year, maybe 40 to 50 new testers, as in new entrants into the industry. I don't think it'd be worth someone writing an MVQ for that personally. So there are 2 competent person schemes. So there's ATMA and there's Elmhurst. ATMA is the larger of the two, with roughly about 85% market share, with Elmhurst having the other 15%. Both these schemes use the MTC and the NOS to assess the competence of the members. Both of these are named in the building regulations. Each scheme does maintain a separate database of tests, and these tests are not publicly available. We do sometimes get requests from universities for information from the ATMA database, and then we anonymise the data and send that off so the students can complete their work. ATMA's currently got 443 registered testers, and on average, that's about 615 tests per day that are lodged via the ATMA lodgement system, which then produces a certificate. There's probably realistically about 150 very active testers, and the remaining ones are reasonably casual. No, it's not their main job. They do something else and then do testing as a side business. Unfortunately, the wording in the building regulations is a bit weak. It could be a lot stronger. So it isn't mandatory to be a member of a competent person scheme. So you've got building regulation 43. So it states here that a certificate by someone registered with Elmhurst or ATMA can be used as evidence of compliance with regulation 43. Unfortunately, it doesn't say that they're not authorised to accept certificates or test reports from other people. So, although it's not a mandatory thing, there are a lot of building control who actually don't accept certificates or reports from people that are not Elmhurst or ATMA registered testers. The reason being is they don't have the confidence in it, but there are still some that do get registered. And building control in Scotland, they're called verifiers, but it's the same role. Certificates can be issued instead of a full report. If a tester is a member of a competent person scheme, then a certificate is fine. And the certificate is just a one-page document that gives a summary of the test result. But if a full test report is requested, then it's mandatory to actually provide one. So ATMA does operate a network of authorised trading partners, and we do operate them both in the UK and internationally. So the Building Performance Hub is the one that's part of the BCTA group. So I'm usually the lead trainer there of the Airtightness testing courses with the Building Performance Hub. I kind of switch between ATMA and the Building Performance Hub in my role. We've got BISRIA, we've got Stroma, and we've got IRT. So they're the 4 training partners we've got in the UK. Internationally, we've got ATMA, Australia and New Zealand. We've got Salamis, operate out of Dubai, and we've got Building Doctor, operate out of Dubai, and we've got Aplita, who they are based in Spain. I'm not exactly sure where in Spain, but we don't get a lot of delegates from there. Elmhurst Energy, for their scheme, they accept certificates from all of the authorised training providers that we've got. They do run their own testing courses, but they've not met our audit procedures. So we don't accept testers that have done their course via the training and assessment route. We do accept them via the route 2 with the prior experience. And that is basically the end of my presentation.